really troubling story out this morning about the reporters who we have come to know and respect, right? The reporters that we pick up the Washington Post and we pick up the New York Times, or we pick up the USA Today, or we pick up any of these big national newspapers, which we are told, right, is the bastion of truth, right? We are told that these companies are, and these reporters, that we should pay to go behind a subscription paywall, right? Because these are the only guys telling us the truth. I've documented repeatedly here on the show how the New York Times has lied, has put out phony information, has had reporters not even going and covering certain stories and lying about their sourcing, lying about actually being in certain areas where they said they were when they never actually left their house. I mean, God knows we know the Jason Blair story from a number of years ago, right? Reporter who was literally reporting on stories that he made up fake interviews with people. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? Even last week, the New York Times talking about President Obama's birthday party, where there was hundreds of people at his birthday party not wearing any masks. And the New York Times reporter that covered the story said it was okay though, because they were sophisticated, vaccinated. It was a quote, sophisticated, vaccinated crowd. That's why they didn't have to wear masks. Imagine if that was a Trump party. That's how the New York Times covered the Obama birthday party. They were a sophisticated, vaccinated crowd, so it was okay that they didn't have masks on. Well, now, a new report out this morning shows that the Center for New American Security, which is a Pentagon think tank, provides jobs residencies to the top national security reporters for the New York Times and the Washington Post. So here's what this says. Imagine a country where there's no separation between the government, the military, and the media. A lot of Americans would think of China, Russia, or North Korea, right? But it's a perfect description of the United States today. In this report, located in Washington, the Center for a New American Security, the CNAS, is the clearest example of this unholy merger, the Gray Zone reports. The CNAS is the premier foreign policy think tank of the Democratic Party. It is funded by the Pentagon and the State Department and has taken more money from weapons companies over the last several years than any other think tank in Washington. So let's get this straight. These reporters who are supposed to be reporting on the Pentagon and national security and war-related issues are basically funded or sitting on the board of this think tank and is funded by the very organizations, the Pentagon and the State Department, that they are there to report on. See any conflict of interest here at all? That's like, I'm a tech reporter who works for Apple. I'm a tech reporter covering technology companies who works for Google. Or I sit on a tech think tank that's totally funded by Google.
That's the same as these companies that do these, they do research on their product or whatever, and it's by a company that they own. So it's all
Right.
favorable.
Right. Yeah. CNS, it's the premier foreign policy think tank of the Democratic Party, funded by the State Department and the Pentagon, and has taken more money from weapons companies than any other think tank. It's also funded by oil companies, big banks, and right-wing governments, basically the most destructive forces on the planet. So for President Biden, right, how does this affect him? Well, apparently CNAS serves as a farm, almost like, a farm team in baseball, at which key positions in his administration are cultivated. At least 16 alumni are now in key positions inside the Biden Pentagon and State Department. So let's be clear about something, okay? Not even accounting for the reporters for a second, which is all egregious on its own. Members of the Biden administration come right out of this think tank, and they are funded by the weapons companies that get money from defense contracts paid for by the Pentagon. Do you see any kind of crony capitalism here at work?
Well, and think about this on an even greater scale. CNN itself takes advertising money from these companies And that's why they don't ever talk bad about war, because they get all the money from the same contractors that we're talking about here are funding our news channels. So you don't think they're going to kind of change their reporting a bit?
Yeah, I mean, have you ever seen commercials where they're like, at Boeing, we're building the next generation of aircraft? Like, I've seen commercials like that. At Raytheon, we're building the engines that drive commerce around the world. You know, at Lockheed Martin, we're doing those are all defense contracts. That's what, and they funnel money onto CNN, onto Fox News, onto the major media stations. So when you're watching mainstream media and you see those commercials, they're not there to get brand recognition for Boeing. Boeing's not hoping that like more people are like, Boeing. No,
I'm going to go buy a plane today.
It's just payola, right? It's just pay for play. That's all it is. So they're making money off of it. CNN's not going to do a bad story about Boeing. They're not going to do a bad story about Raytheon. They're not going to do a bad story about war contracts or any of this stuff. They're not going to do it. That's how this works. Greasing the palms of these guys, right? The report goes on. But what's most shocking is that several national security and foreign policy reporters for the elite U.S. media outlets are affiliated with the CNAS, and therefore indirectly affiliated with and likely paid by the U.S. government and corporations, the very forces they should be holding accountable. For more than 20 years, the New York Times, the Washington correspondent David Sanger, has relentlessly pushed deceptions to con the public into supporting U.S. aggression and war. He, of course, famously pushed George W. Bush's lies about WMDs in Iraq and about Iran attempting to create nuclear weapons with evidence-free claims. No evidence whatsoever. And evidence-free claims about Russian cyber attacks with no evidence. The list goes on.
Isn't it funny how when like you'll notice if something is on the news and it's like pro-war or whatever, then all of a sudden all these blue check marks on Twitter start trying to sell us war, like this is what they're doing, this is what's happening. And it's like this propaganda campaign just spreads out across the internet, like they're just waiting for their orders, their marching orders.
Yeah, like, and even like his colleague Eric Schmidt, as is pointed out in this piece. I mean, you would see that, right? You'd see retweets by these, like all these New York Times colleagues, and like they retweet each other, and like, oh yeah, you know, my colleague David Sanger just posted a really interesting story on the nuclear buildup in Iran. Like, you got a must read story. You got to must read this story. And then, you know, CNN has David Sanger on in a scary piece with Wolf Blitzer. Like, joining us now is David Sanger from the New York Times. So, really scary story out of Iran, David. Can you tell us more about what Iran is doing with their nuclear arsenal? That's right, Wolf. Here's what's happening. And okay, where's this coming from? Like, this is our national news media. No wonder we can't trust it. Eric Schmidt, Sanger's colleague, senior correspondent covering national security for the New York Times, is also in residence at the CNAS. He's famously pushed Russia bounty stories, which were eventually discredited. He was also a reliable promoter of intelligence claims about Russia hacking, which was totally debunked. And the Washington Post. I mean, on and on and on at the Times. Michael Gordon is another one, along with Judith Miller, who promoted, of course, the Iraqi WMD deception. The Wall Street Journal, who Michael Gordon works for, spent months pumping out Wuhan lab leak propaganda, once again promoting claims of intelligence officials without any skepticism. Greg Jaff is a Washington Post national security reporter. His article on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan quotes Elliot Cohen, a former Bush administration official who's now a fellow at the CNAS. Probably doesn't disclose that anywhere in the article, by the way. Like, you know, like I'm currently a resident at the very same think tank that's being paid for by the Pentagon. Should I mention that? No, I guess not. That's your mainstream media. And then there's a news story out this morning also that the New York Times admits now that it sends some of their stories to the U.S. government for approval before publication. Just look at that.
Huh.
So it sends it over to the Pentagon.
Who'd they admit that to? A real journalist?
Mm-hmm. Ben Norton. New York Times actually casually acknowledged that it sends major scoops to the U.S. government before publication to make sure that national security officials have no concerns. This confirms what New York Times correspondent like James Risen have said. The American newspaper Record regularly collaborates with the U.S. government, suppressing reporting that top officials don't want made public. Mainstream media. This is why the American people don't trust the mainstream media. It's not because because they've undermined our trust.
Well, and basically they're another arm of the executive branch, right? I mean, they're supposed to be. And the thing is, like, I have always said, I feel like the media is the one doing the biggest injustice to the American people, because if we were an informed population, we would not stand for the stuff that's happening. The reason that everything happens the way it does is because it happens behind closed doors. We know nothing about it because nobody's holding anybody accountable. Nobody's putting anybody's feet to the fire and asking them hard questions so that we can make informed decisions. We are making decisions based on, you know, the left versus the right and opinion. You know, Rachel Maddow, Hannity, all these people that just spew opinion, bad opinions, in my opinion. And that's what we have as our news. So, you know, that's like the biggest injustice I feel to the American people.
Yeah. What sources can you trust? I mean, when all of the sources that people get their news from, you sit down, you go to a hotel, you pick up on USA Today, right? They have a big pile of USA Today's, Gannett newspapers, right? You're going to trust USA Today, a billionaire corporation?
Well, you know, I get better news from RT News than I get in the United States.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, getting your news from U.S. sources, that's you know, very few sources exist that I trust. Very few sources. Most of them are independent journalists who are actually in the field, and you know, they're supported by their own readers because they don't have a big corporation paying for them.
Same.
You know, like this show. Like if you subscribe to this show and you support this show, we are not paid for by any big corporations. You know, that's the way it goes. I don't have like a Rupert Murdoch or you know, anybody spending billions of dollars telling us what to do here on this show. We get to cover the stories that make people uncomfortable, and we go after both sides. So when you subscribe here, that's what you get. And when you support us and you become a channel member for $1.99 a month or whatever, then that helps us. You know, that helps us keep doing what we're doing. To be able to write this show and do this show every day and get these stories out to people that you're not going to see anywhere else. Thanks for subscribing to the channel. You can also become a channel member by going to morninginvest.com/join, where you can stick it to the mainstream media and support independent journalism. We're able to bring you the stories that you won't see on any of the major billionaire-backed networks. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time, everyone.